Please join me in welcoming Sunny Hostin to the Strand.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am so honored to have been asked to moderate this discussion with someone that I consider not only a friend, but just a warrior. A little bit about Ben, for those of you who don't know. He is the founder and principal owner of Ben Crump Law. His tireless advocacy, and when I say tireless, you all know what I mean by that, right? Has led to legislation preventing excessive force and developing implicit bias training and policies. He has represented families in several high-profile civil rights cases, including Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Stephon Clark, just almost too many to name at this point, unfortunately. He represented 9 of the 13 black women who were victims in the Holtzclaw, Oklahoma City police rape case in 2015, and he worked on the precedent-setting U.S. Supreme Court case involving excessive police force against Robbie Tolan in 2008. Recently, and this is interesting to me, Ben sued Harvard University over images of slaves once used to advocate racism that Harvard refuses to turn over to the family of those slaves. In fact, these photographs are believed to be the earliest pictures of American slaves in existence. If Harvard relinquishes the photos to the family, it will mark the first time, the very first time that descendants of African slaves have recovered anything from slavery. Once again, Ben is a warrior and a trailblazer. He's the president of the National Civil Rights Trial Lawyers Association. He previously served as president of the National Bar Association. He was the first African American to chair the Florida State University College of Law Board of Directors, and he currently serves on the Innocence Project Board of Directors. I really don't know how he finds the time to do all this, and he wrote a book. He's the founder and director of the Benjamin Crump Social Justice Institute. He's a movie star, for those of you who saw the film about Thurgood Marshall. He worked on that, but he also worked on acclaimed docudramas Evidence of Innocence on TV1, Who Killed Tupac? The Search for Justice on A&E, and he served as the executive producer of the documentary Woman in Motion about Nichelle Nichols. He's a frequent contributor to Huffington Post, Black Voices, CNN, and USA Today, and I certainly miss him from my time on CNN. So please, please welcome my friend, the trailblazer and warrior, Benjamin Crump. So Ben, I know we don't have a ton of time because I have a ton of questions.
Okay.
This book is fantastic. I understand it took you
3
years to write.
3 years.
And let me ask you this. What inspired you to finally sit down and write? Because your career is a storied one.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Sunny Hostin. We know how busy you are talking about being busy. Isn't she great every day on The View? I mean, and I just want to acknowledge some special people here in the room. Before I answer your question, we have the sister of Botham Jaw, who many of you know was killed in his own apartment in Dallas, Texas. So, and she's very shy, but I want her to stand and be recognized. And too many friends from the New York area here, the intimate, preeminent pathologist in not just America, the world, Dr. Michael Biden.
Yes, I see him over there.
And his beautiful bride, great lawyer, criminal and civil rights lawyer, Linda Kenny Biden.
Yes.
And just really quickly to my law partners and co-counsels who are here, I thank you all for being here. To my fraternity brothers of Omega Psi Phi fraternity, we thank you all for being here. And you talked about the Harvard lawsuit. Is Tamara Lanier, I know she was coming in from Connecticut, but she is also here, and we're going to make history on that case, son. It's going to be
I don't doubt you.
the first reparations case in America.
Yeah.
Amen, David Gruber?
Yeah.
You know, what inspired me to write this book? I would say two things, Sonny. The first thing was when we were in Ferguson, it was so profound to me that the young people, the young brothers and sisters, refused to remain silent. They would not let them sweep the death of Michael Brown under the rug, no matter how the prosecutor in St. Louis County tried to do it. And I remember specifically this one night when the National Guard was out there and you had all these young people protesting, and they were fearless. Are you talking about warriors? They had their assault rifles pointed at their center mass, and this one young brother, he walked right up, Scott, to the gun, touching the tip of his nose, and he said, "You all kill us when people aren't watching. Go ahead and kill us while all the cameras are here so the world can see how you all are killing us." And that was so profound to me. And I thought it was so important, like he did, that the world see how they're killing us, and not just on the street corners, but more poignantly, how they're killing us in the courtrooms in every city, in every state, every day, all across America. They're killing us softly with these trumped up felony convictions. And so when I was talking to Tracy Sherrod about what kind of book to write, I just kept remembering in my mind that young brother saying, we need to show the world how they are killing us. And so that was the first thing that inspired me. And the second thing is this. Ben Franklin said that democracy is like two wolves and a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. He said, you know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, Charles Coleman, to know who's going to win that vote. But he said, liberty. Liberty is making sure that that lamb is well armed to protest the vote. And so I want to make sure with open season that the young lambs in communities of color were well armed to protest the school to prison pipeline, that they were well armed to protest the racist stand your ground Jim Crow laws, that they were well armed to protest the voter suppression, that they were well armed to protest environmental racism in such that has children in South Central Los Angeles have 30% of the lung capacity that children in Santa Monica have, because we have made it legal for them to put toxic chemical companies and corporations in our neighborhoods. And so I wrote that open season to try to endeavor literally to stop the open season killing of people of color in and out of courtrooms.
Well, I mean, now, Ben sent me the book. I got the book at my home, and I was so excited. I opened it up, and then I see the title. It says, Open Season, The Legalized Genocide of Colored People. I said, oh, boy. Here we go. We're going to go on a ride.
Yeah.
What made you decide to use the term genocide? Because I think it truly is a genocide. But what made you decide to actually use that term?
Yeah, and Sonny, that's why I'm so honored that you're doing this first interview during the book launch, because you're a prosecutor, and like Linda Kennedy Biden, y'all have seen how they treat people of color in the courtroom. In many ways, Sonny, this book is an extension of what the great Paul Robeson, who in 1951 was probably the most famous African American in the world, and W.B. Du Bois, who was the first graduate of Harvard, black graduate of Harvard with a PhD, and one of the founders of the NAACP. They went to Paris, France, to the United Nations Convention in the aftermath of World War II, where you had many war-torn countries making petitions of genocide based on the atrocities of how they have been ravished in their countries. And these black leaders, they went and they filed a petition with the United Nations saying we charge genocide against the government for how they're killing Negro people in America. And they based it, Sonny, on the killings, the lynchings, and the raping daily of black people in America. And they said by the definition of the United Nations Convention of Genocide, which is an act or acts intended to destroy in whole or in part a people based on their nationality, their ethnicity, their racial status, or their religious status. And they made the case. And so with open season legalized of genocide of colored people, what we're doing is 70 years later making the arguments that they are still killing our children when you consider black men in America only make up 7% of the population, yet we make up almost 50% of the population on death row. Let that sink in for a second. And I know you have a black son, Sonny, and we have to make sure our children understand that they are targets. And if we don't give them ammunition to not bullets, not guns of violence, but intellect, to be able to overcome, to be more intelligent than those who would seek to oppress him, then shame on us. And so that's why we wrote this book. And the last thing I would say, 1 out of every 5 black men in states like Florida and Tennessee are convicted felons. And the statistics aren't much different in other states in America. And the experts have opined that if this trend continues, Sonny, that 1 out of every 3 black males in America will be convicted felons in the next 25 years. And boy, when you're a convicted felon, a whole host of things come with that.
That's right. I mean, opportunity is gone in so many ways. I'm going to jump around a little bit because now that you brought up children, I mean, my son is someone that I always think about. He's touring Stanford right now. I'm not sure why, when there are so many great schools right here in New York.
I think it's
so far away.
I think it's the weather, Sonny.
Yes. But you quote Frederick Douglass as saying, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And what was interesting to me is that I'm working on a story actually about black men and mental health and how it's the black men and black boys in particular are suffering from the indicia of PTSD, in large part untreated. So how do you build up children of color in a culture that is just so rife with racism with racism?
Yeah, you know, I think about that a lot. Attorney O'Neill and I often talk about what we see on a daily basis with how they direct file young children of color directly into the adult system. And I was fiberglassed when I learned this fact as we were doing research for the book, that toddlers in nursery school and kindergarten are suspended and expelled at the same rate as black and brown people are incarcerated in America. And I had to scratch my head, Heather, because I kept thinking, what can a 3-year-old or 4-year-old do to get suspended or expelled? But I mean, they're targeting our children at such an early age. And obviously you all know about 3rd grade reading scores and the building of prisons. But the one thing, having a 6-year-old daughter, Brooklyn, who I love dearly, Brooklyn in the house, and helping to raise my 2 cousins who call me Uncle Ben, who are young men now the ages of 20 and 25. And when we were going through Trayvon, Sonny, you may remember they were right along his same age. But I kept thinking to myself over and over again that we have to constantly remind our children that we will not let this racist criminal justice system define them or take them down, that we're going to be there for them, especially when you really put it into context. The context is this, Scott, that you can go in any courtroom, you see little white boys and little white girls come in with very similar fact patterns to little black and brown boys and girls. And you see over and over again, Stephanie, that they will get, the white kids get a slap on the wrist. And they're escorted out the courtroom to live out the fulfillment of their destiny and achieve the American dream. And then the little black and brown children are taken to the corner of the courtroom. They are fingerprinted, handcuffed, and convicted of a trumped-up felony conviction that they have to wear like a cross on the backs for the rest of their lives. And, you know, we were talking, Sonny, about felony convictions, and everybody says, well, you know, you can't vote and you can't serve on a jury duty and you can't serve in the military. Well, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Yes. When you think about the collateral consequences of a felony conviction, I mean, when you get that felony conviction and you are a person of color, it becomes a daunting task for you to be able to legitimately make a living to support your family, to be able to keep a roof over their head or to keep food on the table, keep the lights on, because everything legitimate that you try to do, once you're a convicted felon, they say you can't do it. To get a college loan or get a Pell Grant, the federal government says not if you're a convicted felon. If you want to be a teacher, you can't get certified if you're a convicted felon. If you want to be a nurse, you can't get certified if you're a convicted felon. If you want to be a real estate agent, you can't get certified. If you want to be a brick mason, you can't get certified. And sisters, if you want to be a beautician, in many states, saying if you're a convicted felon, you can't be certified. In fact, if you are a convicted felon and you have served time in prison, in many states, Charles, you cannot even get life insurance. It's like you're the walking dead. They just haven't given you the death certificate yet. So what we have to do is tell our young brothers and sisters, because women of color are the highest growing percentage of people being incarcerated in America today. We have to constantly make sure they understand that we won't let this racist criminal justice system define them, that we still believe in them despite if they have a felony conviction, that we still love them, that we still believe they have redeeming qualities to offer society, that we still believe that they're the best thing that God gave us to be part of our families, because most people in communities of color have a relative that is caught up in the system, and we can never give up on our people.
That's right.
Never give up on our people.
Yeah. Well,
and I want to say one last thing on that, because you asked me that direct question, and I was building it all the way up to this here. My two little nephews, and I had a brush with one of my nephews who almost got caught up in the system, and it was a traumatic time for our family. And after that, we developed this saying, and I know people may perceive it as being controversial, but in the book we have the Black Pledge of Allegiance. And the reason we have that in the book is because we have to find some way on a regular daily basis to remind our children that we're in this struggle together and that we're going to win. And in that poem that we used to recite every day in my house, it started off with, you know, today's another day in the struggle for the liberation of black people. This liberation demands revolution. This revolution lives within me, for I am the hope of the slave, the antagonist to the white supremacy conclave. I am the very definition of ebony, a dark, hard, deep, black, durable wood that safeguards everything in my neighborhood, and so on and so forth. We will repeat that every day, and my boys will walk out the door with a sense of pride that we're going to survive no matter what the statistics say.
I love that. You talked briefly, you just mentioned briefly, women are incarcerated now so much more than they used to be. And you write about this in the book, about not only losing your freedom,
Constitutional rights, yeah.
your constitutional rights, but women are also losing their reproductive rights. Can you explain that, what you talk about in the book?
Yeah, and it's horrifying, Sonny, when you think about it. We talk about genocide as late as 2014 in the state of California.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, supposed to be one of the liberal states, Dr.
Yeah.
Biden. You have where women of color, blacks and Hispanics, were being forced to have tubalizations. They were having forced sterilizations committed on them while they were in prison that they didn't even know about. They thought they were having routine surgeries, and they were literally sterilizing them. And this isn't, I'm not talking about in the 50s and the 60s when it was rampant in America, in the 70s. I'm sorry. It was not until like 1981 that North Carolina stopped allowing forced sterilization, not even if you were in prison, but if you were on welfare and they thought you had too many children and you were minority, they just said that legally we can sterilize you because you are a burden on society. And the Supreme Court case has never been overturned on that issue, that legally they can justify this here, and they don't do it to people who are in affluent communities. They go to the disenfranchised and the marginalized communities to do this. And Sonny, just in Tennessee, as late as 2017, boom, they had a judge in Tennessee tell a black man who was facing a 20-year sentence that he would take 15 years off his sentence if he would agree to be sterilized. I mean, what kind of law would say that we want to stop your ability to reproduce? And that's what we have to educate people on, because people don't know really how they're using the laws itself that are supposed to protect us in many instances to kill us.
I mean, I had no idea, actually. I mean, the book definitely is eye-opening, so thank you for that. It's eye-opening in so many respects. One thing that occurred to me, you document case after case after case, and I'm sorry for your loss in particular, about shoot first and ask questions later. We see it all the time when it involves a black person, even if that person is sitting in their home watching television, eating ice cream, right? Even if that person is playing video games with her nephew in her own bedroom. Now, what first do you think drives that? Because we've been talking about it on The View, and some of my colleagues, you know, keep on saying, well, why? Why? And I know what I want to say.
Thank you for holding your peace, Sonny. We'll say it for you.
But what do you say to that?
As I'm looking at Alicia Finley too, both of y'all's sister, I'm thinking literally with my heart, Sonny, that if this white police woman would have just followed her training, if she would have just followed Dr. Biden and Attorney Biden, the policy that says if you have a situation with a burglary, you don't go into it if you can safely set up a parameter and try to de-escalate the situation, not only for your safety, but also for the safety of the person who you suspect. But she didn't do that, because far too often, for whatever reasons, when it is a person of color, police officers shoot first and they ask questions later, and they usually are not held accountable when they do it. So I am so thankful to both them's family for having the dignity and grace to see it through. They were offered plea deals and everything to say, we'll just try to sweep it under the rug, but they said, no, we want our day in court. And it was historic because it was the first time in America where a white policewoman was convicted of murder for killing a black man. And so, Alicia, we applaud you and your family for having the fortitude to give us a new precedence in America. And
are we seeing that change? I mean, you know, you and I were together, of course, in Sanford, and I was devastated when I heard the verdict. I think as many of us were. I was shocked. When I heard this verdict, it gave me that little bit of hope, thinking that perhaps your work, perhaps the work of so many others, we're starting to see that change. And now we have the case with a Tatiana Jefferson, where within, I think, less than 3 days, this officer is charged with murder.
Yes. And
is there a change?
I think, like the late Johnny Cochran said, it's a journey to justice. And so we make progress, but then we see with our national leadership in the White House, they try to take those things back. We talk about in the book, Sonny, after the Civil War, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, the so-called Civil Rights Amendments, when they passed to give more freedom and liberty to people of color in America, it was the United States Supreme Court who within 10 to 15 years neutralized them all. And so you have this intellectual justification of discrimination, so we can never feel comfortable that they won't try to throw a curveball at us, because even though they arrested and charged the officer with murder, I don't know if you saw the latest where the police union is coming out saying that, oh, but she had a gun and she pointed it at the police officer. What is he to do? Well, as Sonny so eloquently said backstage, Tracy, when we were together, but Texas is a open carry state. Everybody in Texas has a gun. And
my family members have a gun.
Yeah, and she thought it was a prowler. Yeah. She has every right to defend her home and her castle too. Alicia, thinking about how in the heck they gave the castle theory to Amber Geiger, even though it wasn't her castle, it's still just perplexing to my mind. I can't even explain that to my daughter Brooklyn, and she normally gets everything when we talk about the law. But I do think we're making some progress, and I think we're after Botham's trial and we had got the conviction, I said that this verdict is for Trayvon, it's for Michael Brown, it's for Sandra Bland, it's for Alton Sterling, it's for Philando Castile, it's for Pamela Turner, it's for Walter Scott, it's for Eric Gardner, it's for so many brothers and sisters who didn't get justice. And the reason I say that, because all those cases played a role. They played a role, Mark, in us getting to this point in justice where Trayvon became the #1 news story in the world, but more importantly, it educated America to have a conscience when it came to Black Lives Matter. And when you think of Michael Brown, it played a major role in President Obama signing a bill to pay $50 million to police departments to get body camera videos, because Courtney, black people have been saying for years that the police are brutalizing us, that the police are harassing us, but nobody would believe them. And now we have video camera because of Michael Brown in Ferguson, where all those black people in his community said, hands up, don't shoot. But the system still said, oh, black people, y'all eyewitness account don't matter. We're going to let the murderer of an unarmed black kid come into the grand jury proceeding and testify for 3 hours without being cross-examined, and we're going to change all the rules that we have ever known in the criminal justice system now that this black boy is laying dead on the ground. And I know people like Sonny and Chris and all the lawyers was just saying, hold on, let me make sure I get this. And we talk about this a lot in the book. And I want to make the case to you all, because y'all need to understand, Charles, y'all get it. And there was a brother named Johnson, and he was convicted and put in prison for 7 years of a crime he did not commit. And when they arrested him, boom, he kept saying, well, nah, I didn't do it. Y'all got the wrong person. He said, let me go in that grand jury and testify. Let me clear this up. They wouldn't let him do it. So he was convicted by a jury of his peers, and they put him in prison for 7 years until some good ACLU lawyers came and got him out. And then when he was out and he had been exonerated, he said, I want to sue the prosecutor's office because I said from day one, it wasn't me, and if they would have let me testify at the grand jury proceedings, this would have all been cleared up. But it went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and Justice Anton Scalia wrote the opinion. And what he said, son, in that opinion is the grand jury is not the proper place for you to come and offer exculpatory testimony. It's not the place for you to come and plead your case and your innocence. The place for that is at trial. You will get a chance to argue your case at trial. And so you said, okay, so they denied this brother getting any compensation for 7 years because they said you can't do it then. But then when it's Michael Brown's case and he's lying dead on the ground and Officer Darren Wilson killed him in broad daylight, they then say, the prosecutor, and y'all saw him on the news, he was all up there saying, well, we just want to be fair. We just want to be fair. We're going to let everybody come in and testify. We're going to let the people who want to testify for Michael Brown come and testify. We're going to let the people for Darren Wilson come and testify because we just want to be fair. That's what they kept saying over and over again. And remember, the Supreme Court had issued the rule, the function of the grand jury is not for you to present your case. It's just to lay a proper foundation for which charges could be brought and you can go to trial. And that's all the prosecutor has to do. 99% of the time, when the prosecutor wants an indictment, they get an indictment unless when a black or brown person is killed by the police, and then they can't ever get an indictment, seem like. And so to finish this point off is, y'all see Law and Order every day on TV. Have y'all ever seen the prosecutor come in and say, I just want to be fair? I just want
I want it to be fair.
Yeah, well, you were an exception to the rule. The majority of them come in and say, we want to get an indictment. That's how we get promoted, by getting convictions, especially of people of color. So you literally had this guy change all the rules when Michael Brown was dead on the ground, and literally, quite literally, they had this secret grand jury proceeding, and all those young people who was hoping to see equal justice under the law for what my grandmother called the least of these, an 18-year-old kid who had just graduated high school, they did not allow that to happen in this grand jury proceeding. Really, the first time I think we had ever seen the inner workings of a grand jury proceeding. Yes. Did it mean, Sonny, that he was unfair for the last 28 years of how he prosecuted and convicted so many people, especially black and brown people, when he kept making this case that he just wanted to be fair in this case of Darren Wilson? So, Alex, that's what I kept asking myself the whole time.
I'd never seen anything like it.
I'm still, ever. It's been 5 years since Ferguson, and I still can't believe the courts let him get away with this BS.
You're still so passionate about all of this. How do you continue the fight? Because I get tired.
You know, Thurgood Marshall was my personal hero. And Justice Marshall, you know, when he was a kid, and he this is in his biography, Sonny, he said that when he was a little boy, that they told him that you'll never be able to go to school, the best schools in America, with little white children, and you can't go to the colleges because segregation was just a reality. That's just our reality in America. That's the law. But Justice Marshall never gave up. Every day he would wake up and he would do whatever he could to tear down segregation wherever he would find it. And so I think if Justice Marshall could do it, and he had it way harder than we had it, Sonny.
True.
I mean, you know, everywhere Thurgood went, the black people will be all excited that Thurgood is coming, but the KKK and the lynch mob will be waiting for Thurgood. And he knew his life was under constant threat, literally. I mean, everywhere he went in Florida, they ran him out. They almost got him. In the movie Marshall, it starts off with him almost dying of asthma for running through the swamp, you know, to get away from the KKK. So I say, if he could do it, if Harriet Tubman could do it, if, you know, so many other people could make these sacrifices to uplift our community, to make a better world for all of our children, then shame on me for not using the blessings that God gave me every day that I can to try to make a better world for all of our children.
Well said. Well said. One of the things that I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you get asked a lot, you know, what can I do to make a difference? You know, you have a platform, I have a platform, but what can I do to make a difference? And I noticed in your book, it ends with 12 personal action steps. How are you hoping that readers of the book will use those?
It is my hope, as I said, when these well-armed lambs are armed with the tools and the intellect and the diplomacy to go out and take on these enemies of equality, that they will follow the examples of Thurgood Marshall, follow the examples of Brigadier General Benjamin Butler, when we have to use the law as a weapon for good. We can't let the enemies of equality use the law to continue to disenfranchise and marginalize and dehumanize people. We have to, and it is within us that we can do it. I love how John Legend used his social media account to influence people to sign petitions to ban the box so convicted felons could get gainful employment. And everybody got a social media account. Everybody can do that. But what Brigadier General Benjamin Butler did in the Civil War, he was educated as a lawyer, by the way, Sonny. And it's so profound when you seek to do the right thing, the impact it can have on the world that you won't even imagine. I often say that with Trayvon case and other cases that people would not have taken before they became, you know, high-profile cases. When the Civil War broke out and they then took the women and sent them south and made the men keep working up in Virginia and the more northern southern states, that was the last straw for many of these men. They said, you done took our woman, you done took our family, we have nothing else to live for, so we're gonna sacrifice and we're gonna try to escape and get across enemy lines to freedom. And they did that, but remember the law in America was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. When a slave escaped, you had by law an obligation to return them to their slave master. And it's asinine, but a lot of the Union officers were doing that. But Brigadier General Benjamin Butler said, well, you know, also based on this American law, you all define black people as property. And, you know, in wartime, if I seize your property, then we define it as contraband. And the Contraband Act says that we do not have an obligation to return contraband for you to use against me in wartime. And so he defied the Supreme Court in the Fugitive Slave Act and said, no, we're going to keep these black men under the Contraband Act of War that's also declared in the United States Constitution. And on top of that, he said, we're going to pay these black men for their labor since they're now on the Union side and they're free. And think about it, y'all. These black men were no longer slaves. Everybody says Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation, but yet he only freed the slaves that were living in the South, which he had no control over because they had succeeded. So really the first time slaves have been freed in America was when this brave general following the law, using the law as an instrument of good, made this decision that we're going to free black people if they can escape and get to us. And then from that point, when word got around, Sonny, they escaped by the hundreds to the thousands to Hampton Roads, Virginia, and it became one of the first independent townships of free black people. And years later, it has evolved to the great historically black college and university, Hampton University, that's still educating the hearts and minds of black people today. And that goes all the way back to Brigadier General using the law as a weapon of good.
Now, I'm gonna go back to my colleagues who keep on asking me why. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Because sometimes I get tired of educating people. Your book, though, opens with a chapter called Racism Kills. What do you mean by that? And is that truly the answer to the why question?
I think in many ways it is, because you have to think, when we think about what they did in 1951, they literally said America, either through being complicit or responsible for the genocidal situation of the Negro people in America. And what I think those highly intelligent brothers and sisters were saying 70 years ago was simply this: race silence does not mean race neutral. When you are educated now and you see the injustice, you can't just look away and say that I didn't cause the problem, so it has nothing to do with me, like many of our white brothers and sisters like to do sometimes. They say, well, I didn't own slaves. I didn't do anything. It's not enough, as Dr. King said, for you to see an injustice and say, I'm going to be neutral. Neutrality in the face of injustice in and of itself is injustice. So when you think about them seeing little black boys and little black girls and brown boys and brown girls in the immigration camps on the border, and the judges are complicit and say, well, the law says I can't do anything about it. Well, again, you're being disingenuous. It's hypocrisy when you think about the United States government right now is selling weed to pay their bills. Yet when black and brown people were selling weed to pay their bills, they put all of us in prison. So we should declare that the United States is forbidden to make money off of selling marijuana unless they free all the black and brown people who are languishing in prisons now, not for killing anybody, not for doing anything or harming people, but for selling marijuana. Mm-hmm. That's the hypocrisy that racism can kill you, because it happens over and over. Think about the Flint water crisis. Think about this, and I know the time is ending, but let me make this point if I can. Can I make this point? All right. And because when we say colored people, we're really not just saying it exclusively to race, but colored by your life experiences. Whether you black, Hispanic, Native American, whether you are a woman who have been discriminated against, whether you are a member of the LGBTQ community being discriminated against, whatever way you have been marginalized, that's what this book is speaking to. And when you think about Flint, water, in a community, it affects everybody. Black, white, brown, it doesn't matter. But remember, when we think about this war on drugs, what did the prosecutors all say? They said we had to lock all these little poor minority people up and throw away the key, because Attorney O'Neill, they said we got to be hard on crime. We got to send a message. They are poisoning the community. And they kept saying that over and over again. We got to lock up little Junebug and little Shaniqua and Jesus and all the other minorities because they are poisoning the community. We got to be hard on crime. And the whole opioid thing, that's a different story. But That's what they kept saying, Sonny. And then we come to the Flint water crisis where they was actually poisoning the community and nobody goes to jail. I mean, not one soul went to jail for them killing people, causing disease to people, children who drunk the water. I mean, they are still having effects with their brain because of drinking that contaminated water, but yet the hypocrisy is when you have people actually poisoning the community, nobody's held accountable. And the only way we can get to trust in this legal system is we have to have transparency plus accountability. And that is the only way people will start to trust the system. And so with the book, what we're trying to do in many ways is hold a mirror up to America's face and say, America, you're better than this.
And anyone that reads this book will be better for it because of all of the information in it. And I'm just so proud of you as my friend. What I've told so many people is that Ben called me at CNN. When Ben calls you, you know, you listen, around the Trayvon Martin case. I don't know if you remember this. And he was pitching it to me, and you wanted to get it on a major news network. And I pitched it to my producers, and they said all the way to the top, but this is a local story. Who cares? This is a local story. I went back to Ben and I said, everybody's saying it's a local story. He said, I'm going to make this a national story. And I went back to Anderson Cooper, and Anderson said, let's do it then. Let's do it then. And you have made this a national issue. And I applaud you for that.
Thank you, Sonny.
I applaud you for that.
I love you for.
I applaud you for that.
Thank you for everything you did.
You are a warrior.
Yeah.
I want to open it up for a few questions from the audience, if anyone has any questions.
If you want to raise
We've
your
covered
hand,
a lot, but
bring in the mic.
yeah.
Yeah, Sonny even we see her on TV how awesome she is. To be up close and personal, isn't she awesome?
What got you interested in law, and at what age were you interested in law?
Well, Tracy Sherrod, when they read the book, that's on the first page of the introduction. But it truly goes back to my elementary school when we first, middle school, I'm sorry, when we first, based on Brown versus the Board of Education, were able to go to the new school in the white community that had the best facilities and the best books and everything. I was in the 5th grade, and I never forget this. I just turned 50, so I'm getting a little old. My daughter says, Daddy, are you over the hill? I said, no, Brooklyn,
No.
I'm on the hill. But I was there, and the poor children, I was raised by a single mother. We would have to stand in the long lunch lines to get the free lunch. And they had this thing called a la carte where the children who had money, they could go buy their lunch and get anything they wanted. You know, us little poor children, we had to eat what the Board of Education thought was of nutritional value and so forth. But the other children, they could go buy hamburgers and pizza and, you know, milkshakes, everything kids wanted. And there was this little white girl who I won't call her name, but she came over with one of my neighbors from the projects, Keena Ann, and we were standing in the back of the line, and they were talking to us, and they said, you know, we're gonna go get some lunch and everything, and because we was like, you trying to skip Keena? Because we were gonna look out for her. And they said, no, we're gonna go get some a la carte lunch, and I was thinking, well, Keena family must be doing okay. She gonna go be able to afford, you know, to pay money. And then the little white girl said, yeah, I'm gonna buy Keena lunch, and, you know, I have money. And she pulled out $100 bill, and it blew me away. And she said, no, this is my allowance I get every month, and so forth. And I was just shocked that a 10-year-old kid could get a $100 bill because my mother worked 2 jobs. She worked at the hotel doing laundry, and she worked at the factory. And, you know, $100 was almost her salary back in 79 for the whole week. But this little kid, this little white girl said, this is my $100 and I can do whatever I want with it. And to prove to us that she really could do whatever she wanted with it, she said, I will buy y'all lunch too. Because we didn't believe it. We challenged her. I mean, but she went and bought us lunch. And I just remember, Stephanie, as I drove on the bus, as we rode on the bus going home back across the tracks, David, to outside of the community, thinking the whole time how some people in certain parts of town have it so good when certain people in my part of town have it so challenging and so forth. And I remember thinking, but the reason we got to go to the school, the new school with the new books, was because my mother told me a man named Thurgood Marshall and Brown versus the Board of Education. And I said, from that day to this one, I'm going to be like Thurgood Marshall and try to make it better for people who live in my community too. And that's what I continue to do. And that's when I decided I was going to be a lawyer right there in the 5th grade, little black boy in the projects. And I never lost sight of my dream.
What's your thought on millennials?
Oh.
You know, you hear about the millennial generation and they're kind of not engaged in everything, but in some cases they may be.
Well, I'd say this here. When they said it doesn't matter who you vote for, that should have been a wake-up call for the millennials in a major way. Elections matter. You got to get engaged. It's not enough for you just to protest on social media. You got to actually show up to the polls and vote. And the national elections are important, but I submit to you the local elections are the most important, because many times who are going to control whether your child, your sister, your daddy, your auntie goes to jail is that local prosecutor.
Yes.
I mean, they make the decision. So the millennials, if they ever want to see why elections matter, do what I challenged all of you all to do. Just go sit in the back of a courtroom and do what Chuck D from Public Enemy say, look how they do justice, how they run the justice system. I mean, you don't have to be even intelligent. Stevie Wonder could see how discriminatory the criminal justice system is on any given day in America. So we got to tell those young millennials, and I know Michelle Euban and I was just talking, we just got to get the young people to vote, because we did the Breakfast Club interview, and we said, oh, 1 million young people will listen to that interview tomorrow, and we were saying how profound it was, but it means nothing, frat, if they don't go vote. And so elections matter. We have to continue to tell them now more than ever, for their future. Forget everybody else, but for their future. Yeah. If we don't vote like our lives depend on it in this next election, who knows what this fool gonna do next?
Yes.
Thank you again, Attorney Crump. Try to keep this brief, but this question was sparked by your book, Chapter 7. You quote Assata Shakur. Since it's the 53rd anniversary today of the Black Panther Party,
Yes, sir.
2 things that you spoke about reminded me of their platform in regards to the dismantling of the police systems in regards to police brutality, and also in regards to freeing black people from prison. So I want to frame this question. When we talk about police reform, what are your thoughts on the demilitarization of police, but also stripping of duties of police when it comes to maybe there are some instances where social workers or other people of that sort could handle some of the issues that police do in our communities that leads to some of the police brutality and violence. And the second one is in regards to prison As we know, the 13th Amendment says slavery does not exist, but except for people in prison. As we see in our prisons, it's slave-like conditions, it's badges of slavery. What are your thoughts on the change of that language and what it could possibly lead for the freedom of not only black people, but other marginalized communities that are inside our prison systems?
Now, excellent questions. I'll try to keep my answer shorter. On the prison industrial complex, which is an extension of slavery, we all know it. You know, we have a chapter in there also called legislative intent, you know, that we can predict who the criminals are going to be by how we write the laws. And that's what's happening, especially when you look at how we talk about the saggy pants law, and you know how that brother ended up dead from having saggy pants in his interaction with the police. And so I'm not so certain, unless we can change the hearts and minds of the people, of the powers that be, it would do anything if we changed the words, because they will come up with ways that I have termed, in Ben Crump's own terminology, the intellectual justification of discrimination. I mean, they do it. Read the Supreme Court decisions. I say a very provocative thing that me and my editor, Tracy, really had to think about and talk about. Because I said, when you look at the decisions made by the United States Supreme Court, they always end up with poor people of color getting the most of injustice and the least of justice in almost every, you know, decision that they render. So I think until we can literally start figuring out how to show them that it's more beneficial to have people out of prison than in prison, nothing will change, because right now the prison industrial complex, just like slavery, is a very profitable enterprise. And just like Asada said in that quote, you know, people who are being oppressed have never gained their freedom by appealing to the morals of those that oppress them. Never has happened anywhere in the history of the world. The only way that we can win this battle, and I talk about it a lot in the poem, The Black Pledge of Allegiance, is we have to make sure our children are more intelligent than those who will seek to oppress them. It is that simple. We won't win this battle with guns. We won't win this battle with violence, anything. The only way we win this battle is with intellect. Intellect is supreme above all else.
Time for maybe one last question. I'll go all the way in the back.
Thank you very much. So across the country, there's a progressive movement with respect to criminal justice and criminal justice reform. And oftentimes, particularly here in New York, the legislation has now seemed to have forgotten the crime victim in attempting to right the wrongs that was already embedded in the system. Can you speak to how, as this, for instance, a prosecutor, a progressive thinking prosecutor of color or not of color, I mean, how would you suggest that, in light of the progressive movement, that this prosecutor address those concerns of mass incarceration, but
Can you
at the
keep the
same
mic to your mouth?
of mass incarceration, but at the same time, ensuring that the poorest people do have justice, that justice is given to them, that they're not suffering from injustice because they are poor victims.
Yes, ma'am. And I know she's asking the questions, but Sonny, as a former prosecutor, I'm going to let her touch on this question, too, because I'm sure she's had to deal with it on many occasions as a prosecutor of color, trying to be equitable, but yet still trying to do your job, because we don't want criminals, whether they're black, white, brown, whatever, to be able to commit crime without being held accountable. That will go against due process, and we would be disingenuous if we said we want just because they are a certain ethnicity, we don't want them to get equal justice under the law, whether that is holding them accountable or whether that is exonerating them. You know, I'll say this quick thing about prosecutors. We have to have more black and brown prosecutors. I mean, we have to have more black and brown police officers. We have to have more black and brown jurors, because that's the only way the criminal justice system is going to change. The definition for insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect different results. So with McCullough and Ferguson, who have been the prosecutor for St. Louis County for 28 years and never once indicted a police officer, we almost was insane to think that he was going to change just for Michael Brown and the people on Cantfield Avenue. And I say this, and boy, it hurts me to say this, Sonny. And this is one of the realest things. It just hurts me so bad to say this, and I'm so happy with both them, y'all, that we got the conviction. Even though people have to understand, when we say we are only advocates. It's only prosecutors who can control whether somebody goes to jail or not. And so when people hear about Trayvon's killer and Michael Brown killer and Alton Sterling killer, Eric Gardner killer not going to jail, it's the prosecutor. It's not the black civil rights lawyer who's out here advocating like me and all my colleagues, like Linda Biden. You got to understand, like Malcolm X said, if you don't stay woke and stay alert, you'll end up cheering for the people who killing you and rooting against the people who trying to save you. And so we have to educate our people every chance we get to encourage those civil rights advocates who are out there trying to do it. But this black lady said during Trayvon, and she said it to me and Natalie Jackson, and it's just so painful to me to say that she was right. And Chris, you may remember this black lady told me and Natalie, my one of my co-counsels in Trayvon case, she said, man, they just playing with black people emotions. That white boy ain't going to jail for killing Trayvon. And I wanted to say, that's not true. There is a chance that we can get justice too. But she said in her life experiences, she had saw so many Trayvons that she knew that he wasn't going to jail. So thank God that at least for the legacy of Trayvon, because of the influence, that we are now holding prosecutors accountable to do their job and give us equal justice too. And that's what I think the prosecutor just has to strive for, equal justice. I shut up and say, you can be more equipped for this.
Well, I was going to basically say the same thing, in that, you know, you hear about people talking about how powerful a judge is and how powerful a jury is. Let's make it very clear. The most powerful person in every single courtroom is the prosecutor. You won't even be inside of a criminal courtroom unless the prosecutor decides that you are going to be there. So we as prosecutors make the decision which cases we're going to bring. And so when I was a prosecutor, when cases would come across my desk, if it was what I would call broken window policing, which is you got a young kid and maybe he or she broke a window, or you have, you know, a lower level robbery, I would want to find out, why did the kid do this? What's going on with the family? Is there a family support system there? Is this the first time, you know, that he's done anything like this, or is this a repeat offender? So I would look into things, and there were a lot of cases that I chose not to prosecute. And that's why it's so important to have people with the similar backgrounds, because I'm a kid from the South Bronx projects. So I've broken a window in my day. So I know that that shouldn't be the end of someone's life. And I think really that is the answer. More of us need to be on that side of the bench, on that side of the courtroom. And I also think, in terms of your point about Black and brown police officers, there needs to be more of a community policing model when it comes to prosecutors and police officers. They need to work together. Prosecutors need to know the neighborhoods where they are prosecuting cases. That way people that are witnesses to crimes feel more comfortable coming to you. That way police officers know the community. They know who the bad kids are, who the bad guys are, who really are the kids that are just struggling with something. That is, I think, the answer to sort of this, pipeline crisis that we're seeing and this racism we're seeing in the justice system.
I knew she would have a better answer than me.
Not a better answer, same answer, really.
So do we want to do one last question?
One last question.
Or two. 'cause
Two last questions there.
Back
Okay.
there for a while as well.
Thank you. I think there's also a disconnect because I know when you were mentioning sometimes your friends keep asking this question, why? And it's very uncomfortable when you have to explain to them there are certain concerns that you have as a parent of a black son, and I can see any child, or I could hear about a police officer getting killed and have empathy and cry for the widow. And I think because our lives, you see the video of the shootings, you see people being brutalized, there is this disconnect where someone is always looking for, well, there was probably a gun, there's a reason why people were upset. And I do understand that the judge and the prosecutor, but how can we educate the entire, educate people to understand that when this is happening to black and brown people, you should also be upset and be concerned and feel the pain of that mother, regardless of the situation. Because I think that's half the battle, where they had to do something. They had to do something. And it's very disrespectful, and it's hard to have a connection. And then I have friends that, I have white friends that are raising black children, and they want to talk to me, and when something happens because the colleagues don't understand, or the colleagues in the building. I'm a school teacher. And
God bless you.
Thank you. And thank you. I love my job, by the way. But it's a problem because people make these comments and they forget that's someone's child. You know.
You know, two things.
If only he had followed the police orders type thing.
Yeah, they always try to justify the killing, whether it's on the street or whether it's in the courtroom. I mean, they literally justify why little Billy or little Becky get to walk out the courtroom who had the same fact patterns as Leroy and Shaniqua, but they don't give the same benefit of the doubt, the same benefit of consideration and possibility to our children. And many times, I think, Sonny, you and Stephanie, y'all know about TV more than me, but I honestly believe Malcolm X had it right when he said TV is one of the most powerful drugs Alex ever invented. He said TV will have you, Linda, thinking things in your subconscious you are not even aware that you're thinking. And so when you see that over and over again, black is bad, black is criminal, black is evil, black is dangerous, black is violent, it starts getting into your subconscious. And you hear on the other side, police officers are always good. Police officers always tell the truth. Police officers are always great. I mean, it resonates. I remember I used to go to this certain network begrudgingly, and we would do the interviews, and this very popular newscaster, I guess they call them opinion hosts over at that little network. And he would say to me, quite literally, he would say, well, Ben, you're an upstanding counsel. You're a fine representative for civil rights. You're a noble person. Are you saying that all police officers are bad? Because wouldn't you say most of them are good people? And I would look at him and I would say, Well, Bill, are you saying all black people are bad? Because wouldn't you agree most of them are good people? We can't let them have the high ground on morality. We got to tell them that, like Dr. King said, there's some good in the worst of us and some bad in the best of us. We're all human beings. Nobody is better than anybody else, but yet they over and over again want to think for some reason in every situation, and I think it's the television in their subconscious mind, they think the black person really isn't as good as we are, whether it comes to crime or whether the police kill them, or even on a job interview. We talk about that in the book, Tracy, where when they did those tests on job interviews, and they found that they would sit farther away from black people in the interview than they would white people. I mean, it's subconscious. So what we have to do is have constant implicit bias training, because all of us have implicit biases. I'm guilty, David, everybody has them, but we got to constantly work on it, because I don't want that implicit bias to have an impact on your life. And what we really want is America, white, black, everybody in America, to believe the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. They recite it all the time. We need them to believe it and act on it. That we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that amongst them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that means even little black and brown people too, America.
We have one last question.
Hi, Mr. Crump. So I'm actually a black prosecutor, and the reason I decided to become a prosecutor is because when I was in high school, that's when Amadou Diallo was shot. Oh yes, can you? So as I was saying, I'm a prosecutor, and the reason I became a prosecutor is because when I was in high school, that's the time that Amadou Diallo was shot. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Amadou Diallo was shot. Someone shot 41 times by 4 plainclothes police officers, and then all of the officers were acquitted.
Yeah.
And I think that for me and the people who are in law school with me, many who are also millennials, we decided that we wanted to do this because we wanted to make a difference. But what I also noticed is that for folks that who are attorneys who aren't prosecutors, who aren't defense attorneys, who are environmental law attorneys or in private practice and corporate law, they also want to be able to do things. So how can individuals who are attorneys who aren't doing direct legal representation, especially the bar associations, how can they do stuff to be able to help move the ball forward?
Absolutely. And give that brother a hand for wanting to make a difference.
Hard job.
That's incredible. And can we have all the lawyers in the room stand up? All the people who are lawyers stand up.
Oh, okay.
Wow. I mean, outstanding, because you all are the heroes. You're the unsung heroes for justice. I think you can always make a difference. As Dr. Martin Luther King said, we all have a role to play. Everybody's role is not to be at the front line with Black Lives Matter and me and Reverend Al and everybody else. You all have a role that you can play to make a difference too, whether that is doing pro bono and taking on a case of a prisoner who is wrongfully incarcerated, who's wrongfully on death row. I mean, you can always do something. If it's going down to city council when a black or brown person is shot in the back, like the new case we just got, Chris, where it's starting to trend on social media. The brother stole a chicken out of the grocery store, literally. Why else will you try to steal a chicken out of the grocery store unless you're trying to feed your family? But for that property crime, the deputy sheriff shot him in the back as he was running away and killed him. And so it's taking on causes where we go down to city council, you with your law degree. Don't just have all the young Black Lives Matter children protesting, but our most able, our most intelligent need to also be there questioning our leadership, at whether it's the mayor, the police chief, or the city manager, saying, why is this happening over and over again in Baton Rouge, Louisiana? I mean, Alton Sterling wasn't enough for us, you know, and those type of things. And the last word I will say is this. We all have a role to play in making them live up to the Constitution. As Thurgood Marshall said, the basis of the Constitution is simply this, that a black baby born to a black mother, the most uneducated black mother, the most inarticulate black mother, the most impoverished black mother, has the same exact rights as a white baby born to a white mother, the most educated white mother, the most articulate white mother, the most affluent white mother, just by virtue of that black baby drawing its first breath as an American. Now, Justice Marshall said, I know that's not the case in America today, but I challenge anybody to say that's not a goal worth fighting for. I challenge anybody to say that's not what makes America the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. So when we stand up for the Trayvon Martins of the world, when we stand up for the Botham Johns of the world, when we stand up for the Terrence Crutches of the world, when we stand up for the Alton Sterlings of the world, when we stand up for the Sandra Blands of the world, when we stand up for the Pamela Turners of the world, when we stand up for the Eric Gardners of the world, when we stand up for the Tamir Rice of the world, when we stand up for the Atiani Jeffersons of the world, when we stand up for the Walter Scotts of the world, when we stand up for the Stephon Clarks of the world, when we stand up for the Corey Joneses of the world, and all the unknown hashtags of the world, when we stand up for what my grandmother called the least of these, what we're really doing is helping America live up to its creed and be the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But more importantly, what we're doing, Sonny Hostin, is helping America be America for all Americans. Thank you.